long time ago, in a world not so unlike ours, an epic struggle of nations was raging. For 100 years, they say, France and England were at war. These two great nations tore and ripped and clawed at one another. One, a giant trying to piece itself together. The other, a well-organized lion seeking greater power. The stakes, all of Western civilization. The rules, out the window. But there's something you don't know. There's more going on than meets the eye. It's a story as old as time, a story a good man will teach his son. Yes, this is where all the memes about the French originate, and yes, this is where English longbows became famous. The war and statecraft of the 100 Years' War were both shockingly innovative and consequential to global technology, but unfortunately, that is not the focus. Today we're talking about philosophy. France and England might not be what you think of when you think famous philosophers, but as I might cover soon, you often find philosophy where you least expect it. Leading up to the 100 Years' War, France and England had very similar philosophies, but towards its conclusion is where they diverge. Really quickly, let's do some history. We're going to put together a 1,000-year timeline, starting with 1066, when a duke, subject to the French crown, conquered England and became its king. Following that, the 100 Years' War, then the Protestant Reformation, colonization of America, the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, and today. These events are a collection of clashes that become more and more idealized, concluding with a question about the future and what it will hold. The King of England in 1066 and for many years after was a man who spoke French. In this period, England and France as entities were very intermingled, and their nobilities even more so. Pop quiz: you're a duke who rules a duchy in the Kingdom of France. With your own army, you claim and conquer a kingdom. At the same time, you're still the duke of that duchy. So are you personally still a subject to the French king, or are your obligations void? Are you only a subject insofar as you were a duke? Is your duchy's allegiance transferred to your new kingdom? These are questions prompted by the Norman kings of England that contributed to war. The other half of the cause was that King Edward III of England, when the French king died, claimed France through his mother's lineage. The French nobles denied this on the grounds of Salic law.
That'll hold in right and title of the female unto this day.
Placing a noble of their choosing on the throne. This new king of France then seized English lands under the guise of aforementioned allegiance dilemma, and the 100 Years' War was off. Fun fact, 80 years into the conflict, English King Henry V was declared heir to the French throne, but died 2 months before the French king. What an epic tragedy that was. The conflict concluded when the momentous figure of Joan d'Arc helped lead a victorious campaign against the English. They reclaimed the Cathedral of Reims, the traditional coronation place for French kings, and crowned the French king who would end the wars and land in his seat. But the twist of tragedy would strike again when Joan of Arc is handed over to the English. Her use now spent, the French abandoned her to her execution. History is more exciting than mythology, and the French always find a way to be the villains. Now, to the Protestant Reformation. To simplify the Protestant Reformation in England and France, after 90 years of internal struggle, England became Protestant and France remained Catholic. The losing side in both cases was oppressed, but the French Protestants, called the Huguenots, suffered far worse. Tantamount genocide. In revulsion to this, a large French sentiment against religion festered and grew. Also during this time, of course, there were wars between England and France. The difference between Catholic France and Protestant England showed a difference in worldview. When these two nations began colonizing the Americas, another difference in worldview became apparent. The French government restricted access to the Americans and sent specific colonists in order to exploit the fur trade in North America. Some advisors and ministers strongly recommended larger groups of people be sent to places like Quebec, but the Crown refused. England developed her colonies differently. Most of the time, it was a matter of companies of people wanting to start a new life in the New World, petitioning the king and acquiring a royal charter permitting them to settle. Notably, the driving force behind English colonization was private interests, merchants, and yeomen who were allowed to pursue what they wished. In contrast, the French mechanism was the government. Also during this time, of course, there were wars between England and France. Let's pause for a minute in the 1600s. This century, which we practically don't talk about, is the start of the modern era. I'd like to bring up two men who sit in the middle of this 600-year conflict I'm theorizing: John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. These men seem to say very similar things. They are both famous as philosophers and political theorists. Additionally, a phrase they both begin relevant paragraphs with is, "Men are by nature free." Both are authors focused on the social contract and define the aim of the government as promoting liberty. But here lies the crux of our argument, the hinge of everything. They are both labeled liberals, but they have fundamentally different definitions of liberty. To the eyes of one, liberty is a lack of constraint. To the other, liberty is having the ability to do things. These seem like small differences, but they are small differences at the very root of political ideology, and they lead to very, very different ideologies. The mixing of these definitions is the cause of remarkable confusion and political strife. The English view of the word is concerned with constraint. The French is concerned with ability. Do note, though, that there are English thinkers with the opposite definition and vice versa. And yes, this is what those pricks are talking about when they say classical liberalism. In practice, English liberalism is very limited compared to its continental cousin. The role of the government in English liberalism is to restore each man to a state of nature insofar as he may pursue his own interest but stop him where he would impose on the interest of others. Law, order, and fairness is what is required in English liberalism. To the French, though, the government has further obligation to the welfare of her people. A starving man's liberty, if that be the liberty to have food, is impeded by his lack of food, and thus the government is obligated to step in and help. This is reasonable, yes. However, one thing to recognize is that one of these is an agency-based system, while the other is not. English liberalism dictates that if two men are given the same circumstances, and one works to achieve a goal and the other does not, then the government is not obligated to fill the gaps with another man's resources. To this system, the government's role is complete at the point where all men are under the same circumstances. By the way, same circumstances does not mean the same amount of resources. If one man's father advantages his descendants under a fair system, that's fair play. Callous talk such as this is not to discourage charity, which is a necessity of any healthy society. Far be it from good men to say, "What is mine is mine." Rather, it is a limitation imposed on the government to say that forceful reallocation of wealth is an abomination. In a case where welfare is determined to be the most efficient model to promote fairness, it would be permitted under English liberalism. But the end is always fairness and safety, not equality of result. The aim of a system is very important, and a materialistic goalpost can always be moved. Modern welfare is required to provide much more than was demanded in the past, and more still will be demanded in the future. The model of English liberalism would hold that the government is only part of the brain of society. Perhaps, as the human brain has left and right hemispheres, perhaps the separation of church and state takes on a whole new meaning in this light. French liberalism simply gives too much credit to the capabilities of the government. Rousseau thought that through social conditioning humanity could be perfected. Guess what? Hitler did too. You may think that the opposition to welfare programs are cruel and callous and irrationally pessimistic. I feel that too. I wonder if I feel that way because I'm caught in the snare of these ideas. It is important to realize that the tendency against welfare is employed under the assumption of a fair system, neither of which are really present in modern-day America. In sum, it is said by the English that the government is to provide fair play, and by the French to ensure welfare. The first is not against resource assistance to the needy, but says that it is not the role of the government, which would be inefficient and intrusive if given the task. The French Revolution was a totalitarian, atheistic explosion of French liberalism that rocked the entire continent of Europe. Off the heels of American independence, the French decided they had some new ideas too. These were two nominally liberal revolutions, but they had completely opposite implications. And, yet again, there were both kinds of liberals in both revolutions. For example, the likes of Thomas Paine, who was an American, but a French liberal of considerable influence. And French military officers, who had often had the other kind of liberal sentiment. In any case, the French liberals are often the vanguards, inciting action without compromise. The demographics of these people predominantly include government bureaucrats and discouraged academics. America benefited from the radical ideas of these men, but cooler heads prevailed in her maturity. However, in France, more cool heads rolled than prevailed. Comparing the revolutions, only slightly more than half the number of people were killed in the battles of the American Revolution as were officially executed by the French Revolution, with hundreds of thousands more killed in civil violence during the French Revolution. Nominally, these movements were both liberal, but in practice, they were as far as East is from West. Early America was securely representative in its system of government. England at this time was as well, and was rapidly becoming more liberal. But, liberal. While the French maintained mob rule until conquered by a Caesarian figure. And yet, all you ever hear is that one inspired the other. The statement is true, but the whole story is much more accrediting to America and representative government. The Russian Revolution? How does that relate to our topic of England versus France? The Russian Revolution and the resulting government was a blend of Marxism and French liberalism. The global balance between English and French thought tipped to the English side during the Victorian Age, but swung aggressively to the French with these socialists, communists, and Marxist thinkers. The Soviet Union matured into an organism of its own, but it launched spores of French thought and gave fuel to those that were already in the West. America freaked out about the Red Scare, but dealt with it cartoonishly and clearly not effectively. In philosophy, the Cold War was just another stage of English versus French, with the red and blue switched briefly. We thought we won, but really, the French just hid themselves momentarily. Governments today are held to French liberal standards. Education today is 100% French liberal. The state of entropy always seems to have the French win. Only with exceptional leadership do the English take ground. The war is no longer fought with swords and bows. It's fought with information and narrative. It's been primarily a war of ideas for the last 400 years, and the English today are mostly on the other side, with the last English liberal prime minister probably being Winston Churchill. Have the English lost? Will this conflict end with one kind of liberal fading into darkness? Who knows? In a hypothetical situation where you are struggling, if you're struggling in a fair system, is it justified to blame the government? If you're uncertain as to which side you support, that's fine. I am too. Some people feel the need to justify themselves or separate themselves from certain groups of people by calling themselves specifically classical liberals. Me? I'm a liberal. Politics come from philosophy. If you're ever confused on what to think, just think deeply on the past. Study deeply in the past. The further you are from the current situation, the less entangled you are in the modern narratives. There is no need to pledge yourself to a group politically. It is only thorough and honest thought that is demanded of you in your responsibility as a citizen. It takes a mature person to deny the resources of someone who has more, and entropy will never allow that outcome.